The first man they killed after freedom was not a slave master. He was a black man. His name was Isaiah Bell. And when the chains finally broke, nobody carried him into the daylight. They dragged him into the mud and called it justice. The first man they killed after freedom was not a slave master. That is the part the old records do not explain. His name was Isaiah Bell, 29 years old, born enslaved on the Whitlock plantation in Georgia. Property on paper, flesh in the field, useful when silent, dangerous when remembered. By the time freedom reached the plantation, Isaiah had already been convicted in the court that mattered most, the memory of his own people. They said he had ridden with slave patrols. They said he had pointed out hiding places. They said he had helped track men and women who ran toward the swamps with bleeding feet and stolen minutes of hope. They said he had sold his own sister. So when the war ended and the master's authority began to crack, nobody waited for a judge. Nobody asked for a ledger. Nobody asked for the truth. They found Isaiah near the old tack shed where the horses used to be kept and where ropes hung from iron hooks in neat rows. The place smelled of dust, leather, and old fear. A crowd gathered, not white men. Freed people, men who had carried chains, women who had buried children without markers, boys who had learned to lower their eyes before they learned to write their names. They stood around Isaiah with the rage of people who had survived too much to be gentle with a traitor. Someone said, "You sold us to them." Isaiah did not deny it. That silence became the final evidence. His shirt was torn at the collar. There was blood near his mouth. He looked at the faces around him one by one as if searching for someone who was not there. Then he asked the only question anyone remembered clearly. "Is Ruth alive?" No one answered. A man stepped forward first. His name was Jonah Turner. Years earlier, Jonah had lost a son during an escape attempt. He believed Isaiah had helped the patrol find the boy. He had carried that belief like a coal under the skin. Jonah raised his hand. The first blow landed. Isaiah fell once. He got back to his knees. He did not beg. That too made them hate him more. By sundown, Isaiah Bell was dead. There was no sermon, no stone, no hymn. His body was left at the edge of the field until two women, both old enough to remember his mother, covered him with a feed sack. One of them whispered, "May God judge him." The other said nothing. 15 years earlier, Isaiah had been alive in a different way. He was 23 then, tall, narrow-shouldered, with hands made strong by work and eyes trained not to reveal what they saw. He worked close to the Whitlock house, closer than most. That was the first mark against him. On that plantation, closeness to the house did not mean safety. It meant exposure. It meant the master saw you more often. It meant you heard things you were not meant to understand. It meant if you were clever, you could become useful. Isaiah became useful. Master Whitlock trusted him with horses, maps, harness repairs, and messages sent between the house and the overseers. Isaiah could read trail marks. He knew the low paths near the creek. He knew where the clay held footprints and where pine straw swallowed them. He knew which dogs followed scent and which followed noise. That knowledge made him valuable to the men who hunted runaways. It also made him hated by the people who ran. When someone disappeared from the quarters, Isaiah was often called before dawn. A lantern would appear outside his cabin. A boot would strike the door. A voice would say, "Get up. We need your eyes." And Isaiah would rise. He would dress without speaking. He would pass the cabins where people watched him through cracks in the boards. No one called his name. No one wished him mercy. On one cold morning, a man named Caleb ran. Caleb had waited until the moon was low and the patrol drunk. He slipped past the corn crib and moved toward the tree line with a sack of cornmeal, a knife, and no shoes. His wife stayed behind with their infant son. If Caleb made it north, he would send word. That was the promise. On plantations, promises were often the only property people owned. By sunrise, Caleb was missing. Whitlock ordered the hunt. 3 white men saddled horses. 2 dogs were brought out on chains. Isaiah stood near the fence while the overseer shoved Caleb's wife into the yard and demanded to know which way he had gone. She said nothing. The overseer turned to Isaiah. "You know his tracks?" Isaiah looked down. There, in the wet dirt near the wash line, were 3 partial prints, left heel deep, right foot angled outward. Caleb's walk. Isaiah nodded. The women in the yard watched him. Ruth watched too. Ruth was 16 then, his sister, his last blood. Their mother was already dead. Their father had been sold before Ruth remembered his face. Isaiah had carried Ruth on his back when she was small enough to sleep against his shoulder. Now she looked at him like she was trying to decide whether he was still her brother. The party moved into the woods. Isaiah walked ahead with 1 dog handler. He crouched near the ground, pointed to a broken fern, and said Caleb had gone west. He had not. Caleb had gone north. A few yards later, Isaiah stepped on a clear heel mark and ground it into mud. He broke a branch, facing the wrong direction. When the dog pulled toward the creek, Isaiah kicked loose soil over a patch of disturbed moss and said he doubled back. The men believed him because they needed to. That was how power often made itself stupid. It mistook obedience for loyalty. By mid-morning, the hunt was moving away from Caleb. The dogs were agitated. The riders cursed the heat, the insects, the thick ground. Isaiah kept his face empty. Near the creek, he found a strip of Caleb's shirt snagged on a thorn. He palmed it before the handler saw. Then he dropped it downstream, where the current broke against stones. The dog caught the scent there and dragged the men toward water. By afternoon, the search had failed. Caleb was gone. The overseer blamed the dogs. One rider blamed the rain from the night before. Whitlock blamed carelessness. He looked at Isaiah for a long moment, but said nothing. Back at the quarters, Caleb's wife stood outside her cabin with the child in her arms. She did not know whether to hope. She only knew Isaiah had ridden with the men who wanted her husband dragged back in chains. When Isaiah passed, she spat near his feet. "You'll answer for it," she said. Isaiah did not look at her. That night, in the dark behind the smokehouse, Isaiah removed the strip of Caleb's shirt from inside his coat. He tied it to a low branch beside the east path, where the next runner would see it and know the creek route was unsafe. Then he went back to his cabin and sat on the floor until morning. He had helped Caleb escape. He had also made sure Caleb's wife would hate him. Both things were necessary. On the Whitlock plantation, secrets could not survive sympathy. A softened glance could be noticed. A whispered thank you could become testimony. Gratitude could get a person killed. So Isaiah collected hatred because hatred was safer. He made himself useful to the master and unforgivable to the quarters. The system that owned them had rules. One of its oldest rules was this: no one was allowed to trust completely. Trust made escape possible. Distrust kept people in place. Whitlock understood that. He did not only use whips, chains, and sale papers. He used rumor. He used hunger. He used small privileges like knives slipped between ribs. He let one man carry keys so another man would despise him. He let one woman work in the house so field hands would wonder what she had traded. He fed suspicion because suspicion did not require wages. Isaiah learned to move inside that machinery. He learned where the patrol maps were stored. He learned which horse threw its shoe on wet ground. He learned that a saddle strap could be cut halfway through and still hold until the 3rd mile. He learned that dogs could be confused with ash, pepper, pine tar, and creek water. He learned that a wrong direction, spoken with confidence, could save a life. But every rescue demanded evidence against him. Every escape needed a witness who saw Isaiah leave with the hunters. Every life saved made his name darker. Ruth did not know this. She only knew what she saw. She saw her brother stand beside white men while names were called. She saw him return from hunts without bruises, while others returned broken. She saw him speak to Whitlock in a low voice near the stables. She saw mothers pull children away when he passed. One evening, after Caleb's escape, Ruth waited for him near the old well. "You sleep better near the big house?" she asked. Isaiah stopped. There was no one close, but there were always ears somewhere. A child behind a barrel, an old man pretending to mend a basket, an overseer near enough to hear tone if not words. Isaiah said, "Better than sleeping in the dirt." Ruth slapped him. The sound was sharp. Isaiah took it without moving. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. "Mama would not know you." For the first time that night, something in his face changed. Not much, just enough to show pain before he buried it. Then he said, "Mama is dead." Ruth stepped back as if he had struck her. From the shadows, two people saw the exchange. By morning, the story had spread. Isaiah had mocked his own mother. Isaiah had turned fully. Isaiah belonged to Whitlock now. That was the story the plantation carried, and Isaiah did nothing to correct it, because somewhere beyond the swamp, Caleb was still moving north. And as long as everyone believed Isaiah was a traitor, Caleb had a better chance of staying alive. The old records would never show that. They would not show the crushed footprint under Isaiah's boot. They would not show the strip of cloth moved downstream. They would not show the map marked changed by candlelight while the house slept. Records kept by enslavers were not built to preserve truth. They were built to preserve ownership. So the truth had to hide elsewhere, in broken reins, in wrong roads, in knots, and in the memory of a man who allowed himself to be hated because hatred in that place could be used as cover. If you're listening from a city, state, or country where history still carries buried names, comment where you're listening from below. And tell me this: if a man had to become a monster in everyone's memory to save the people he loved, would you call that betrayal or sacrifice? Maribel taught her children how to survive before she taught them how to pray. That was not because she lacked faith. It was because faith did not loosen rope. Faith did not erase footprints. Faith did not stop a sail wagon once a name had been written down. On the Whitlock plantation, children learned early that danger had patterns. A quiet house could be more dangerous than a shouting one. A kind word from an overseer could mean a trap. A master who smiled while reading papers usually had already decided someone's fate. Mara knew these rules because she had lived long enough to see what happened to people who ignored them. She had 2 children left, Isaiah and Ruth. There had been others. The records did not keep them with care. A stillborn child, a fever. A boy sold before his first permanent teeth came in. The plantation ledger reduced loss to numbers. Mothers carried the rest. Isaiah was 9 when Mara first tied his wrists. Ruth was 4, sitting in the dirt beside the cabin door, watching with serious eyes. Mara used a piece of worn rope taken from the smokehouse. She wrapped it around Isaiah's hands, pulled the knot tight, and held it up for him to inspect. "What do you see?" she asked. Isaiah looked at the rope. "A knot." "What kind?" "A hard one." Mara tightened it once more. "That is what they must see." Then she pressed her thumb against the inside loop and twisted her wrist. The knot shifted. Not much, just enough. Isaiah stared. Mara put his finger where hers had been. "Feel that?" He nodded. "That is the door." She made him try it 10 times, then 20, then with his eyes closed. Then behind his back. When he got frustrated, she made him start over. Ruth laughed the first time Isaiah dropped the rope at his feet. Mara did not laugh. "This is not a game," she said. But she let Ruth try next. The little girl's hands were too small, her patience too short. She pulled the wrong way and complained. Isaiah helped her, guiding her thumb against the hidden bend. Mara watched both of them. "One day," she said, "someone may tie you and believe they have finished the matter. You must know when a rope is telling the truth and when it is lying." Isaiah remembered that sentence. Ruth did not. Children remember safety differently from danger. Ruth remembered the sound of her brother laughing. Isaiah remembered the lesson. Mara taught more than knots. She taught them to read the ground after rain. She showed them how clay held the edge of a heel, how dry leaves broke differently under a running foot, how moss crushed under weight but rose again if given time. She taught them which creek stones could be crossed without leaving mud. She taught them that dogs trusted scent more than sight, and men trusted power more than evidence. That last lesson would become Isaiah's weapon. Mara never said she was preparing him to betray his own image. She did not have to. Enslaved parents often trained children for futures they could not safely name. At night, when Ruth slept, Mara spoke lower. "You are older," she told Isaiah. "That means one day you may have to carry what she cannot." Isaiah said, "Carry what?" Mara looked toward the big house, the ugly part. He was too young to understand fully, but he understood enough to be afraid. Years later, after Mara was dead, those lessons remained. Not as memories he cherished, but as tools he used. By 23, Isaiah had become a man the plantation could not read correctly. To Whitlock, he was useful. To the quarters, he was contaminated. He stood in the narrow space between access and hatred, and that space became his operating ground. Whitlock trusted Isaiah near the stables because Isaiah understood horses. He could spot a cracked shoe, a swollen tendon, a weak strap. He could repair a bridle and load a wagon without being told twice. He did not talk more than necessary. He did not meet white men's eyes too long. He knew how to appear obedient without appearing clever. That performance saved lives. It also condemned him. One evening after the failed search for Caleb, Whitlock called Isaiah to the map room. It was not truly a map room. It was a small office beside the pantry, with a locked cabinet, a writing desk, and a wall where roads were marked in ink. Plantations had many rooms like that, rooms where the machinery of human theft became administrative. Whitlock stood with a glass in his hand. "You walked us in circles," he said. Isaiah kept his head lowered. "Dogs lost the scent." Whitlock watched him. "The dogs had the scent until you said creek." Isaiah said nothing. The master stepped closer. "You know these woods better than the men who own them." That was the confession beneath slavery. Ownership did not create knowledge. It only claimed the right to punish those who possessed it. Whitlock turned back to the wall. "Next time you will do better." "Yes, sir." "And Isaiah?" He paused at the door. "If I find out you are making a fool of me, I will not start with you." That was the threat. Not death, not pain, worse, collective punishment. Ruth, Jonah, Caleb's wife, any person close enough to be used as leverage. Isaiah understood. From that night, his work became more careful. He stopped helping people openly, even in small ways. No extra food left where it could be traced. No warnings spoken aloud. No sympathetic looks. He became colder in public, faster to insult, quicker to step away from grief. The quarters adjusted their judgment. Isaiah was not merely weak. He was dangerous. A man named Jonah Turner noticed something the others missed. Jonah was older than Isaiah, strong from field work, with a son named Eli, who had his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness. Jonah had seen Isaiah come back from hunts too clean. He had seen patrols leave confident and return angry. He had seen Whitlock's suspicion sharpen, not relax. One night, Jonah cornered Isaiah behind the corn crib. "You think nobody sees you?" Jonah whispered. Isaiah looked past him. "Move." Jonah stepped closer. Caleb got out because somebody crossed the dogs. Isaiah's face remained flat. "You hear me?" Jonah said. "Somebody crossed them." That sentence was dangerous, not because it accused Isaiah, but because it came too close to gratitude. 2 boys were nearby, shelling corn in the dark. An overseer stood within hearing distance, smoking by the fence. Isaiah acted quickly. He shoved Jonah hard enough to make him stumble. "You lost your mind?" Isaiah said loudly. "Talking like you know something?" Jonah stared at him, confused. Isaiah raised his voice. "You want the overseer to hear you speaking on runaways? You want your boy questioned?" The overseer turned. Jonah's face changed. He understood too late. Isaiah stepped closer, performing for the white man, now watching them. "Keep your mouth shut before you bring trouble on everybody." The overseer approached. "Problem?" Isaiah did not hesitate. "Jonah been running his mouth." Jonah froze. That was the betrayal he would remember. The overseer looked at Jonah. "About what?" Isaiah answered first. "Nothing worth hearing, just field talk." The overseer struck Jonah across the side of the head with the back of his hand, not enough to break him. Enough to mark him. "Get back," the overseer said. Jonah did. Isaiah walked away before Jonah could see his face. The next morning, Jonah refused to look at him. By evening, the quarters had a new story. Isaiah had informed on Jonah. Isaiah had humiliated a man trying to protect his family. Isaiah was lower than they thought. That story was useful. It kept Jonah from speaking again. It also planted a hatred that would survive into freedom. This is how the system worked. It did not need every lie to be invented by the master. It only needed conditions where truth became too dangerous to speak. The enslaved were forced to interpret shadows while men with ledgers controlled the lamp. Isaiah learned to make the shadows serve him. When Whitlock changed patrol routes, Isaiah memorized them. When sale notices arrived, he watched whose names were copied twice. When a neighboring plantation requested dogs, he loosened the latch on one kennel and blamed a child for leaving it open. When a wagon needed repair, he shaved a wheel peg just enough to split under distance. Each act was small. Each act could be explained as error, poor wood, bad weather. Careless handling, animal temper, bad luck. Bad luck became Isaiah's cover, but bad luck repeated too often becomes evidence. Whitlock began keeping Isaiah close, not because he trusted him completely, but because he wanted to measure him. That was more dangerous than suspicion from a fool. Whitlock was not foolish. He understood control as an inheritance. His father had owned people. His grandfather had owned people. He had been raised to believe cruelty was discipline, and discipline was business. He did not think of himself as evil. Men like him rarely did. He thought of himself as practical. That made him more dangerous. One Sunday, while the plantation pretended to rest, Whitlock summoned Isaiah to the stables. There was a new map on the table. Rough paper, 2 roads marked. One crossing circled. "Runaways have been favoring the North Marsh," Whitlock said. "Next time we search east first." Isaiah looked at the map once, only once. He knew it was false. The North Marsh was not marked correctly. The circled crossing was useless in high water. Whitlock had drawn a trap and placed it where Isaiah could see it. A test. Isaiah lowered his eyes. "Yes, sir." Whitlock folded the map slowly. "You remember what you see?" "Some." "Good." 3 nights later, a woman named Lydia ran with her husband. Lydia was pregnant. That fact mattered to everyone except the men who owned the records. She had worked in the laundry and heard she was to be moved after the birth. Her husband had been threatened with sale for answering an overseer too slowly. They left under a moonless sky with a blanket, dried peas, and a piece of metal sharpened into a blade. By morning, Whitlock knew, he called for horses, he called for dogs. And he called for Isaiah. The plantation watched him walk toward the stables. Ruth stood among the women. She did not spit. She did not speak. Her silence was worse. The patrol moved east first. exactly as Whitlock had announced. Isaiah understood the trap fully now. If Lydia and her husband avoided the false route, Whitlock would know someone had warned them. If they took it, they would be caught. Isaiah had not warned them directly, but he had left a sign 2 days earlier, 3 cuts on a cypress root near the marsh path. It meant the eastern crossing was unsafe. Lydia had seen it. The patrol found nothing. Whitlock's face hardened. He did not accuse Isaiah. Not then. Instead, he created another test. By noon, the dogs picked up a weak scent near a dry creek bed. One handler shouted that they were close. Isaiah saw the truth immediately. Lydia had passed there hours earlier, but she had turned west and moved through bitter weed. The dogs would struggle once they hit it. Isaiah pointed south. "She went heavy there," he said. "Grounds pressed." The handler crouched. He could not read the soil well enough to challenge him. They followed Isaiah. For 2 miles, he led them wrong. Then one of the saddle straps snapped. A rider fell hard, not badly enough to kill him, but badly enough to stop the hunt. The horse bolted. The dogs tangled. Men cursed. Time opened. Somewhere west, Lydia and her husband gained distance. Isaiah stood in the confusion and did not look relieved. Whitlock watched him. Later, back at the plantation, he ordered everyone into the yard. The boy accused of helping Lydia was 12. His name was Samuel. He had carried laundry near the cabins the day before. That was enough. In a slave system, evidence did not need to prove guilt. It only needed to justify punishment. Whitlock handed Isaiah a whip. The yard went silent. Samuel's mother made a sound and covered her mouth. Isaiah did not take it. Whitlock held it out. "If your hand shakes," he said quietly, "I will know where your heart is." Isaiah looked at Samuel. The boy was trembling, but his eyes were fixed on Isaiah's. Something passed between them. Not trust. Not understanding, just terror looking for instruction. Isaiah took the whip. He turned. The first strike hit the ground beside Samuel's leg. Dirt jumped. Samuel screamed because he was smart enough to scream. The second strike hit the post. The third grazed cloth and opened an old scab, enough blood to convince the watching men. Samuel screamed again. His mother collapsed to her knees. The overseer smiled. Whitlock did not. He was studying Isaiah's face. Isaiah kept it empty. When it was over, Samuel was carried away. The community saw what it had been made to see. Isaiah holding the whip, Samuel shaking, Whitlock satisfied. That evening, Isaiah left a bundle of herbs near Samuel's cabin. Samuel's mother found him before he could step away. She threw the bundle at his chest. "God will remember what you are," she said. Isaiah picked up the herbs from the dirt. His voice was low. "I hope he remembers what I could not say." She did not answer. She shut the door. Inside, Samuel was alive. Outside, Isaiah's name became harder to save. By then, it may already have been impossible. By the time Lydia disappeared into the western marsh, Isaiah Bell had become useful to 2 opposing worlds, and trusted by neither. That was the condition he had built for himself. It was not clean. It was not noble in the way stories prefer. It was a strategy made from fear, calculation, and the daily knowledge that one wrong glance could end with someone sold away before sunrise. Lydia and her husband were never found. The plantation did not call that a failure of the slave patrol. It called it evidence of conspiracy. Master Whitlock began tightening the plantation from the inside. Cabins were searched at night. Cooking pots were overturned. Straw mattresses were cut open. Women were questioned about scraps of cloth they had never seen. Children were asked which adults walked after dark. Men were forced to explain mud on their shoes even when the fields had been wet for days. This was how control worked. It did not need to know the truth. It only needed to make everyone afraid of being near it. Isaiah was watched more closely now. Whitlock did not remove him from the stables. That would have been too simple. Instead, he kept him close. A suspected tool is still a tool. Isaiah still repaired tack. He still carried messages. He still stood near the horses when patrols gathered. But now he could feel eyes on his back. The overseer paused when Isaiah touched a bridle. Stable boys were told to report missing nails, cut straps, open latches. A man who once moved in narrow spaces now found those spaces closing. Then came the third escape in less than 2 months. A young man named Peter ran before dawn. Peter was not experienced. He was 17, angry, and too fast to be careful. He left tracks across wet ground and broke through brush like a man being chased before anyone had even noticed he was gone. By sunrise, the dogs had his scent. Whitlock called for Isaiah. The order was deliberate, public, loud enough for the quarters to hear. "Bring Bell," Whitlock said. "He knows how runaways think." That sentence moved through the yard like a verdict. Ruth heard it from the wash line. Jonah heard it from the woodpile. Samuel's mother heard it from inside her cabin, where her son still moved carefully from the staged whipping that had not been staged well enough to spare him pain. Isaiah stepped into the yard. Peter's mother looked at him once and turned away. There was no accusation in her face, only certainty. The patrol moved out before the sun had cleared the trees. This time, Isaiah could not simply lead them wrong from the beginning. Peter's trail was too obvious. The dogs had it clean. Even a careless handler could follow it. Isaiah walked behind the lead dog, counting opportunities. A broken pine limb, a dry slope. A creek bed ahead, a patch of wild onion near the low ground. Peter had made one good decision without knowing it. He had run toward water. The patrol reached the creek within an hour. The dogs pulled hard. One handler shouted, "He crossed here!" He had. Isaiah saw the heel marks in the mud. Peter had slipped going down the bank. His left foot had cut deep. He was tired already. If the patrol crossed fast, they would catch him before noon. Isaiah moved before the handler could read the bank properly. He stepped into the mud and pointed downstream. "Prints smeared," he said. He followed the edge. The handler frowned. "Dog says across." "Dog smells water carrying him," Isaiah said. The handler hesitated. White men in that world liked obedience, but they also liked expertise when it served them. Isaiah had survived by becoming a kind of knowledge they could use and dismiss at the same time. The handler looked to Whitlock. Whitlock was not there. The overseer led this hunt. The overseer spat into the creek. Downstream. They went downstream. Isaiah had bought Peter time, not enough. Time was never enough by itself. A mile later, one dog broke back toward the creek. Its handler cursed and followed. The second dog joined. Now the whole party turned. Isaiah could not stop them without becoming obvious. They crossed at a narrower point and found Peter's trail again. The boy had dragged 1 foot. He was close. Isaiah felt the calculation change. This was no longer a matter of misdirection. It was a matter of obstruction. The path ahead rose into hard pine ground where tracks thinned. Beyond that was a split. North toward open fields, west toward a drainage ditch choked with briars. Peter had gone west. Isaiah could tell by the disturbed grass near the ditch mouth. The dogs would find it, unless something stronger crossed the scent. Isaiah pulled a small packet from inside his sleeve. Ash and pepper wrapped in cloth. He had prepared it days earlier, not for Peter specifically, for whoever would need it next. He waited until the lead rider pushed through a narrow gap. The horse shied at a snake in the brush. The handler looked away. Isaiah dropped the packet and crushed it under his heel. The dog hit the cloud and recoiled. It sneezed, pulled sideways, then lunged north. The handler shouted. The second dog followed the first. The patrol split in confusion. Isaiah pointed north before anyone asked. He cut for the field. They ran that direction for 40 minutes. By the time they realized the scent had died, Peter was gone into the briars. The overseer struck Isaiah with a closed fist when they returned, not because he could prove sabotage, because failure needed a body. Isaiah took the blow in front of the quarters. That should have earned him sympathy. It did not. The people saw a man beaten by the master's agent and still standing with the master's men. They saw punishment, but they did not see innocence. In slavery, appearances were not shallow. They were survival evidence, people judged by what they could afford to believe. That evening, Peter's mother was taken for questioning. Isaiah heard it from the stables. Her voice did not carry long. The plantation had many ways to make sound disappear. At dusk, Isaiah entered the feed room where patrol supplies were kept. He took a rusted nail, pressed it into the underside of a saddle strap, and worked it back and forth until the leather fibers weakened. Then he moved to the map shelf. The patrol maps were wrapped in oilcloth. Most were crude, but useful enough to kill. Roads, creeks, fences, cabins, known hiding places. The enslavers had mapped not only land, but possibilities of escape. Isaiah opened one and changed a mark with a burnt stick. A safe crossing became a dead end. A dead end became a passable trail. A hunting route now bent toward swamp water. Small revisions, the kind a hurried man would blame on poor ink or old paper. He was folding it when the door opened. Whitlock stood there, no lantern in his hand, no surprise on his face, just stillness. Isaiah placed the map down. Whitlock walked in and closed the door behind him. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Whitlock said, "You are either the unluckiest guide in Georgia, or you think I am a fool." Isaiah lowered his head. "I was putting it back." I saw. The master stepped closer to the table. His eyes moved over the map, not rushing. He saw the change. Isaiah knew he saw it. But seeing was not the same as proving. That distinction had kept Isaiah alive. Whitlock picked up the map. "You can read this?" "No, sir." Whitlock smiled without warmth. "No, no, sir." "Then how do you know where to put your fingers?" Isaiah did not answer. Whitlock rolled the map slowly. "You think loyalty is a feeling," he said. "It is not. Loyalty is what a man does when he is watched." He moved toward the door. "Tomorrow," Whitlock said, "you will show me what you are." The next morning, the whole plantation was assembled. A boy had been accused of carrying messages between cabins. Not Samuel this time, another child. 10, maybe 11. His name was Isaac, though most called him Little Ike. He was thin, quick, often hungry, and unlucky enough to have been seen near the laundry after dark. No evidence was presented. None was needed. Whitlock stood on the porch steps with the calm of a man conducting business. Isaiah stood below. The overseer placed a whip in his hand again. The message was clear. Whitlock was not trying to punish the boy. He was trying to expose Isaiah. If Isaiah refused, the mask would break. If he obeyed too well, he would become exactly what everyone believed. If he tried to fake it, Whitlock would watch the angle of his wrist, the force of his arm, the distance between strike and skin. This was not discipline. It was theater arranged by a criminal mind. Isaiah held the whip. Little Ike stared at him. There are moments in oppressive systems when every available choice has been designed by the oppressor. That is not moral ambiguity. It is coercion built to look like character. Isaiah struck the post first, a loud crack. The boy flinched. The crowd flinched with him. The overseer stepped forward. "Not the post." Whitlock said nothing. Isaiah struck again, closer this time. The lash caught the boy's sleeve and tore cloth. The skin beneath marked red, not deep. Little Ike screamed. Good. Isaiah needed him to scream. The third strike landed against the dirt near his knees. The overseer watched, suspicious now. Whitlock came down one step. Isaiah changed tactics. He turned suddenly and shouted at the boy, Who gave you the message?" Little Ike sobbed. Isaiah stepped close and slapped the wall beside his head, with his open hand making a sharp sound. "Speak!" The boy understood nothing except fear. That was enough. His crying became louder, messier, convincing. The crowd saw Isaiah bullying a child. Whitlock saw performance, but not proof. That difference mattered. Afterward, little Ike was released back to his mother, bruised, terrified, alive. Isaiah's position in the quarters was dead. That night, Ruth came to his cabin. She did not enter. She stood outside the door and said, "You like seeing children afraid of you?" Isaiah sat on the floor, back against the wall. "No." The answer was too quiet. Ruth heard it and hated him more for sounding human. "Then why do it?" Isaiah closed his eyes, because Whitlock was listening through other people, because little Ike would have been hurt worse if the performance failed, because Peter was alive in the woods somewhere, because the plantation had turned truth into a weapon no one could safely touch. He said none of that. Instead, he said, "Go back to your cabin." Ruth's voice hardened. "One day, nobody will stand between you and what you earned." Isaiah opened his eyes. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to answer. Then footsteps sounded near the fence. He stood and raised his voice. "I said go." Ruth left. The footsteps stopped, then moved away. Isaiah remained by the door until the yard emptied. Only then did he take a strip of rope from beneath his cot. He tied the mercy knot by touch. Once, twice, again. His mother had called it a door. But every day, the door seemed to open for someone else and close harder around him. Within a week, Whitlock changed the locks on the map cabinet. Within 2, he moved the patrol supplies into the main house. Within 3, he ordered that no enslaved person was to leave the quarters after dark without written permission. The plantation was becoming a cage within a cage. And then the sale papers arrived, not shouted, not announced, delivered in a folded packet sealed with wax, carried by a trader whose boots were clean and whose eyes moved over human beings like inventory. Isaiah saw the packet before anyone else because he was called to take the trader's horse. He watched Whitlock break the seal. He watched the names copied. He saw 3 men listed first, then 1 woman, then a name that stopped the air in his chest. Ruth Bell. He did not move. Whitlock looked up from the paper. For 1 second their eyes met. That was all. Whitlock had found the place to press, not on Isaiah's back, not on his pride, on the last person who still had the power to break him. The sale papers did not need to shout. They sat on Whitlock's desk in a neat stack, folded once, sealed once, handled by men who considered themselves orderly. That was one of the obscenities of the system. Its violence often arrived in clean handwriting. Isaiah saw Ruth's name before the quarters did. Ruth Bell. Female, 17, field and domestic labor, sound. The word sat beside her name like a final insult. Sound. As if the question were not whether she had a soul, a mother, a brother, a memory, a fear of being carried south. As if the only fact worth recording was whether her body could still be priced. Isaiah stood behind the trader's horse outside the office window, one hand on the bridle, eyes fixed on the paper through the glass. Whitlock knew he was there. He let him look. That was the first part of the trap. The trader was a narrow man with polished boots and a pocket watch he checked too often. He had come from Augusta with 2 wagons and 3 armed guards. He spoke of routes, prices, and weather. He did not raise his voice. Men like that made cruelty sound like logistics. Whitlock dipped his pen. 3 men, the trader said. 1 young woman. The buyer wants strength, Whitlock wrote. Isaiah's hand tightened on the bridle. The horse shifted. From inside, Whitlock looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. Isaiah lowered his head too late. That was the second part of the trap. By evening, the list had spread without being announced. On a plantation, news moved through silence. A girl stopped singing at the wash line. An older woman sat down before her knees failed. A boy ran from the yard to the cabins and was pulled back by his mother. Ruth heard her name from someone who could barely say it. She did not scream. She stood still with a wet sheet in her hands until the cloth slipped into the mud. Being sold south was not a change of workplace. It was disappearance with a receipt. Families understood that. Names went south and often did not return. Letters rarely came. Promises almost never did. The road itself became a weapon. Ruth looked for Isaiah. He was not in the yard. He was in the tool shed behind the stables, bent over a crate of harness buckles, not seeing any of them. There were only hours to act. First, he tried the ledger. The sale list would be copied twice. One copy stayed with Whitlock, one traveled with the trader. A change made early enough could become confusion. A confusion could become delay. Delay could become escape. At midnight, Isaiah entered the office through the pantry door. He had done it before. The latch was loose if lifted, not pushed. The floorboard near the cabinet groaned unless stepped over. The desk drawer stuck on the left side. He moved without a lamp. He knew the room by memory. The ledger was under a brass weight. He opened it and found the page. Ruth Bell. His hand moved to the ink. There were other names he could write. That was the horror of the moment. To remove Ruth meant placing someone else closer to the road. There was no innocent alteration inside a ledger built for buying and selling human beings. Isaiah did not replace her name. He changed the mark beside it. A small notation, a sign that she had a fever, not enough to save her, enough to delay inspection. He blew gently on the ink. Then the lamp lit behind him. Whitlock stood in the doorway. No surprise, no anger, only confirmation. "You should have chosen a better hour," Whitlock said. Isaiah did not move. Whitlock stepped into the office and looked at the open ledger. "A fever," he said. "That is your idea?" Isaiah kept his voice low. She was coughing. "Was she?" "Yes, sir." Whitlock closed the ledger with one hand. The sound was final. For a moment he studied Isaiah the way a man studies a crack in a wall he has suspected for weeks. "You have cost me horses," Whitlock said. "Time." "Men, dogs, buyers, sleep." Isaiah stared at the floor. "You have walked beside me with your head down," Whitlock continued, "and all this time you were measuring doors." He moved closer. Isaiah did not step back. Whitlock's voice dropped. "If I accuse you openly, you deny it. If I punish you, you become useful as a martyr. If I sell you, perhaps I lose the only man who knows exactly how my runaways keep vanishing." He placed 2 fingers on the ledger. "So I will do something simpler." The next morning, Ruth would be prepared for transport. Isaiah would prepare her in front of everyone. That was the third part of the trap. It was not enough for Whitlock to sell Ruth. He wanted to force Isaiah to participate. He wanted the quarters to witness it. He wanted to cut the last thread between Isaiah and his own people and see whether Isaiah bled. The following morning came hot and gray. The wagons stood near the yard before sunrise. Their wheels had been checked, their chains stacked, their water barrels filled. The trader's guards smoked near the fence. The horses stamped flies from their legs. The 4 names were called. 3 men came first. Then Ruth. She walked out between 2 women who had dressed her in the cleanest clothing they could find. That small act was a protest and a burial. Her hair was tied back. Her face was rigid. She had not slept. Isaiah stood beside the wagon with rope in his hands. When Ruth saw him, her expression changed. Not fear, recognition. Then disbelief. She looked past him, searching for some other explanation. There was none. Whitlock watched from the porch. The quarters gathered at a distance. Jonah stood near the woodpile. Samuel's mother held her son close. Caleb's wife was there too, eyes hard, one hand over her mouth. The overseer pushed Ruth forward. "Hands," he said. Ruth did not move. The overseer raised his arm. Isaiah stepped in before the blow came. "I'll do it." The yard went still. Ruth looked at him. "Please," she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Isaiah held the rope. Every person in the yard saw his hands. That mattered. The system had arranged the evidence perfectly. Brother, sister, rope. Witnesses, no defense possible. Ruth whispered, "Not you." Isaiah took her wrists. His fingers did not shake. That was the cruelest part of what she saw. He wrapped the rope once, then again. He bent the loop inward with his thumb, hiding the slack beneath the crossing strand. He used the old pattern Mara had taught him on the cabin floor, the knot that looked closed from the outside and opened from within, the mercy knot. It had to be tight enough to pass inspection, loose enough to obey memory. If it slipped too early, the guards would notice. If it held too long, Ruth would be carried too far south. If she panicked and pulled the wrong way, the knot would tighten like any other rope. He worked slowly. Ruth's eyes stayed on his face. "You really are what they say," she said. Isaiah pulled the final loop through. No one else could see the door inside it. Ruth could not see it either. "Mama would hate you," she said. That struck him harder than any hand could have. But Whitlock was watching, so Isaiah leaned closer, his face empty, his voice cold enough to survive the yard. "Don't shame me on the road." Ruth recoiled. To the guards, it sounded like contempt. To the quarters, it sounded like final betrayal. But in another life, when Ruth was small and Isaiah was still allowed to laugh, those words had meant something else. During the escape games, Mara allowed only inside the cabin. Isaiah would tie the rope. Ruth would struggle too early, and he would warn her, "Don't shame me on the road." It meant wait. It meant not yet. It meant the third bend. But grief blocks memory. Fear breaks language. Ruth heard only the brother she loved speaking like the men who owned them. She spit at his feet. Isaiah stepped back. The overseer inspected the knot. He tugged once. The rope held. "Good," he said. Whitlock came down from the porch. He looked at Ruth, then at Isaiah. "Loyalty," he said, loud enough for the yard, "is proven when it costs something." Isaiah said nothing. The trader took Ruth by the arm and moved her toward the wagon. She turned once, not to plead now, but to mark him. "I had a brother," she said. "He is dead." Then she climbed into the wagon. The other three were loaded beside her. Chains were fastened to the wagon bed. The guards mounted. The trader checked his papers. The driver lifted the reins. At the last moment, Isaiah moved toward the rear wheel. A guard stopped him. "What?" Isaiah held up a strip of leather. "Rear trace is worn." The guard looked. It was not worn enough to matter yet. Isaiah had cut it at dawn behind the stable, shallow, angled beneath the buckle. It would hold for a few miles. Then, under strain, on uneven ground, it would split. He touched the strap where the cut hid. "Replace it," the guard said. Isaiah shook his head. "No time, wrap it." The guard cursed but allowed it. Isaiah wrapped the strap with a second tie, one that looked secure and would fail under a sharp pull. The trader wanted movement, not delay. "Leave it," he said. "We're late." That was another cruelty of commerce. It often defeated its own caution. The wagon rolled. Ruth sat rigid, wrists bound, eyes forward. The quarters watched the dust rise behind her. No one spoke Isaiah's name. When the wagon reached the edge of the road, Ruth looked back once. Isaiah stood where she had left him, still, cold, unforgivable. Then the wagon turned past the tree line, and she was gone. Only after the yard emptied did Isaiah move. He walked behind the barn where no one could see him and bent forward with both hands against the wall. His breath came hard, but no sound came out. He had not saved her yet. He had only placed a chance inside a rope. There were still guards, dogs, roads. Fear, memory, timing. A chance was not mercy. A chance was the most he could steal. Inside the big house, Whitlock watched from the window. He had seen Isaiah's stillness. He had seen the crowd's hatred. He believed he had won something. In one sense, he had. By noon, the entire plantation knew that Isaiah Bell had tied his own sister for sale. By nightfall, the story had already hardened. No one would remember the angle of the knot. No one would remember the strap at the rear trace. No one would remember the words from childhood buried inside an insult. They would remember only the image slavery had staged for them: a brother with rope in his hands, a sister in a wagon, a community forced to witness the destruction of trust. That was the crime beneath the crime. The sale took Ruth's body away. The performance took Isaiah's name. The road south did not announce itself as a death sentence. It looked ordinary at first. Red clay, wagon ruts, pines standing close to the ditches, a sky already turning white with heat, a driver holding the reins with one hand, armed guards riding beside the wagon, papers folded inside the trader's coat. That was how the machinery moved people, not always with shouting, often with schedules. Ruth sat in the wagon bed between two men from the Whitlock plantation and one man from a neighboring farm. Their wrists were bound. Their ankles were not chained yet. The trader had decided they would move faster this way until the first stop. That decision mattered. Small choices made by careless men sometimes opened space for survival. Ruth did not know that yet. She sat with her hands in her lap, feeling the rope around her wrists, feeling Isaiah's fingerprints still in the fibers. She did not look back after the plantation disappeared behind the bend. Her mind stayed fixed on one image: her brother's hands tying the knot, not shaking, not fighting, not saving her. The wagon hit a rut. Her shoulders struck the sideboard. One of the men beside her muttered a prayer. The guard nearest them told him to be quiet. Ruth closed her eyes. She heard Isaiah's voice again. "Don't shame me on the road." The words came back as insult first, then as something worse. Familiar. She pushed the thought away. Grief has its own discipline. It refuses evidence that arrives too soon. For the first several miles, nothing happened. The wagon moved through back roads used by traders and patrols, away from main settlements. They crossed a shallow wash, passed a burned field, then entered a pine corridor where the light narrowed and the road bent in hard angles. The first bend came after a mile. Ruth did not count it. The second came near a split oak. She did not count that either. The third waited beyond a low stretch of wet ground where the horses slowed and the rear wheel sank halfway into mud. There, the strap Isaiah had cut began to fail. At first, it made no sound anyone noticed. A few fibers gave way beneath the pull. The wrapped leather shifted under tension. The wagon lurched, but recovered. The driver cursed the road. The trader checked his watch. A guard rode ahead to inspect the ground. Ruth looked down at her wrists. The rope had not tightened. That was wrong. A hard knot should bite under movement. It should pull against the bones. It should punish every jolt. This one held its shape, but a small space had opened near her thumb. Her breath changed. She pressed her thumb against the loop. Nothing. She twisted. The rope moved. Not loose, not free, but alive. The wagon jolted again. The rear trace snapped. The sound was sharp enough to turn every head. One horse pulled sideways. The other backed hard. The wagon tipped, corrected, then stopped at an angle in the mud. The driver shouted. The trader swore. The guard ahead rode back fast. For several seconds, attention moved away from the people in the wagon. That was the first opening. Ruth stared at her hands. The memory came in pieces. A dirt floor, Mara's knees, Isaiah's fingers guiding hers. Not that way. You pull like you want it to fight you. Ruth had been little, angry, embarrassed because Isaiah could escape faster than she could. Then his voice, from another time. "Don't shame me on the road." She stopped breathing. The phrase was not an insult. It was a key. Ruth twisted her wrist inward, pressed the thumb beneath the crossing strand, and pulled down instead of out. The knot shifted. The road noise seemed to vanish. She did it again. The loop opened just enough for one hand to slide halfway through. The man beside her saw it. His eyes widened. Ruth looked at him and shook her head once. Not yet. The trader dismounted and walked to the broken strap. He bent to inspect it. "Who wrapped this?" he demanded. No one answered. The driver said, "Stable boy back there." The trader looked toward the road behind them, as if the plantation might still be visible. It was not. The guard nearest the wagon turned to watch the argument. That was the second opening. Ruth pulled one hand free. The skin at her wrist burned, but the rope gave. She worked the second hand out more slowly. Too fast would draw movement. Too slow would lose the chance. A fly landed on her cheek. She did not move to brush it away. The trader ordered the guard to cut a strip from the spare harness. The guard stepped away from the wagon and went to the side box. The driver held the horses. The road ahead was narrow. The road behind was open but watched. The swamp lay to the west, thick with standing water, cypress knees, insects, and roots that could break an ankle. It was dangerous. That was why it could protect. Ruth slipped the rope under her thigh. The man beside her whispered, "Girl." She did not answer. The trader stood up. The guard reached into the side box. The horse jerked again. Ruth moved. She went over the side of the wagon, not gracefully, not quietly enough to be cinematic. She hit the mud on one knee, pushed up, and ran west. For 1 second, nobody understood what had happened. Then the driver shouted. The nearest guard raised his gun, but did not fire. The trees were too close. The trader yelled not to damage valuable property. That sentence, even then, exposed the crime more clearly than any sermon could. Ruth ran. The first branches cut her arms. A root caught her foot and nearly brought her down. Behind her, men shouted. A horse tried to turn in the mud. The dogs were not with the wagon. That was another small decision made by careless men. They had expected transport, not pursuit, but patrol dogs could be summoned from a nearby post. Ruth knew she had little time. She pushed deeper into the swamp. The ground changed under her feet. Mud sucked at her heels. Water rose to her calves. Mosquitoes gathered around her face. She heard a guard crash through brush behind her, then curse when the ground dropped. Ruth did not look back. She moved toward water because Mara had taught Isaiah and Isaiah had once taught her. She remembered less than he did, but memory under terror can sharpen. Creek water cuts scent. Mud hides pressure. Hard roots leave fewer tracks. She crossed a narrow channel, slipped, caught herself on a cypress root, and pulled free. Behind her, a shot cracked into the trees. Not aimed well. Meant to frighten, meant to stop her body by striking her mind first. She kept moving. By late afternoon, the swamp had swallowed the sounds of the road. Ruth hid beneath a bank where roots hung down like bars. She lay half in water, one hand over her mouth, listening. Men passed once, then again farther away. At some point, dogs arrived. She heard them before she saw anything. Barking in the distance, then closer, then broken by confusion. The rope had been rubbed with pine tar and bitterroot. Isaiah had done that, not enough to erase her completely, enough to corrupt the scent at the beginning. Enough to make the dogs argue with the trail, enough to buy minutes. Minutes were life. The dogs circled near the channel and lost direction. One handler shouted. Another insisted she had crossed south. They split. Ruth did not move. Leeches fixed to her legs. Ants crawled over her sleeves. Her body shook hard enough to disturb the water. She pressed her teeth together until her jaw hurt. Night came slowly. The swamp changed after dark. Men became less brave in it. Horses refused certain paths. Insects rose. Water sounds multiplied. The search weakened. Ruth waited until the last voices disappeared. Then she crawled from the bank and moved north by touch. She had no food, no map, no shoes worth trusting, no certainty that north meant rescue instead of another plantation. But she had one fact. Isaiah had tied a knot that opened. That fact did not become forgiveness. Not then. Survival arrived before understanding. For 2 nights, Ruth moved through water and woods. She ate berries she half recognized and spat out anything bitter enough to scare her. She slept in pieces, never long, never fully. Once she saw lanterns on a distant road and buried herself under leaves until they passed. On the 3rd night, she reached a fence line near an abandoned mill. A cloth scrap was tied to the lower rail. White cloth, 3 knots. A sign. She stared at it, unsure whether it meant help or trap. In slavery's world, even hope had to be investigated. A voice spoke from the dark. "Don't run." Ruth turned, ready to bolt. An older black woman stepped from behind the mill wall. She carried no weapon Ruth could see, but her stance said she did not need permission to be dangerous. "You from Whitlock?" the woman asked. Ruth did not answer. The woman looked at her wrists. The marks were visible. So were the fibers still caught against her sleeve. "Who tied you?" she asked. Ruth's face hardened. "My brother." The woman's eyes changed slightly. "Name?" "Isaiah Bell." The woman did not speak for a moment. That pause mattered. But Ruth was too exhausted to read it. The woman said only, "Come." Inside the mill were 2 men, a lantern covered with blue cloth, a bucket of water, cornbread, and a blanket. One man checked the road through a crack in the boards. The other studied Ruth's hands. "This knot," he said. Ruth pulled away. "Do not touch me." He lifted both hands and stepped back. The older woman brought water. Ruth drank too fast and coughed. "You safe for tonight," the woman said. "Not forever, tonight." That was the language of the Underground Railroad in hostile country. No promises larger than the next necessary step. No speeches, no comfort that could not be enforced. Ruth slept for less than an hour. When she woke, the older woman was repairing the rope Ruth had carried without realizing it. The mercy knot was still partly formed. "You should keep that," the woman said. Ruth looked at it with disgust. "I do not want it. May need it." "I said I do not want it." The woman set it down anyway. By dawn they moved her again, station to station, barn to cellar, cellar to wagon. Wagon to church loft. Names changed, roads changed, directions came in fragments, trust was given in portions too small to waste. Weeks later, Ruth crossed into a place where no one could legally drag her back without paperwork and help from men willing to serve the old order. That did not mean safety. It meant the danger had changed form. She took a new surname for a time. She worked in kitchens. Then laundries, then in a boarding house. Years passed. She married a free black carpenter named Daniel Freeman. She had a daughter. She learned to read scripture first, then newspapers, then letters from people searching for family. She built a life with the discipline of someone who knew life could be confiscated. But her brother remained fixed in one scene, rope in his hands, cold voice. The wagon. When Daniel asked about her family, she told him only parts. "My mother died in Georgia." "Your father?" "Sold." "Siblings?" She paused. "I had a brother." Daniel waited. Ruth said, "He died before his body did." That became the version she could live with. Not the whole truth, not even the truth she suspected in quiet moments, because the knot had opened. The strap had snapped. The dogs had lost her. Those facts existed, but the face she remembered would not release her. Isaiah had saved her body, but not her memory of him. And that was the deeper success of the system that had staged the scene in the yard. It had made rescue look like betrayal. It had made a brother's hand indistinguishable from the master's command. It had sent Ruth into freedom carrying the wrong verdict like a second set of chains. She kept the rope despite herself, wrapped in cloth, hidden at the bottom of a trunk. She told no one why. Some nights she took it out and tried to untie it. Some nights she threw it back untouched. The knot always gave way when handled correctly. That was the evidence. But evidence is not the same as healing. And Ruth Bell, who survived the road south, did not yet know that the man she cursed in private had remained behind on purpose. He had not escaped with her. He had not followed. He had stayed at Whitlock. Stayed under suspicion, stayed hated, because if Isaiah vanished the same day Ruth ran, every hidden route, every altered map, every person who had helped along the line would be exposed. So he returned to the stables after the wagon failed. He lowered his eyes when Whitlock questioned him. He accepted the punishment meant to test him. He let the quarters believe what they had already decided. And when someone asked him days later whether he had heard Ruth was gone, Isaiah said only, "Runaways get caught." The words spread fast. Another proof against him. Another shield around her. In the north, Ruth repeated a different sentence to herself for years. "My brother sold me." It was false, but it had been designed to survive. The war did not arrive at Whitlock with trumpets. It came first as rumor. A white courier riding too fast, a master reading a newspaper twice, an overseer drinking more than usual, a Confederate patrol passing the road with torn uniforms and no confidence in their faces. Then the old order began to loosen. Not collapse, loosen. That distinction mattered. A system built on ownership does not vanish the moment its law begins to fail. It leaves habits behind. It leaves men with weapons. It leaves records. It leaves debts. It leaves fear living in the bodies of people who have been punished for believing in mourning. By the time Union troops moved through the county, the Whitlock plantation was already unstable. The patrols had weakened. The traders had stopped coming as often. Whitlock's money had thinned. His authority remained, but it no longer sounded certain. For the enslaved people, that uncertainty was dangerous. Freedom had been promised in distant places before. Promises could be delayed, denied, reworded, buried under violence. No one on the plantation trusted news until it stood in front of them with a uniform and a rifle. Isaiah was still there, older now. Quieter, harder to read. Ruth had been gone for years. Officially, Whitlock said she had run during transport and likely died in the swamp. Privately, he had not stopped punishing Isaiah for the possibility that she had lived. He never proved it. That failure kept Isaiah alive and under watch. Isaiah's body carried the cost. A stiff shoulder from a punishment after Ruth's escape. A scar near the jaw from an overseer's ring. A limp in cold weather from a horse accident that may not have been an accident. He had learned to work slower without appearing weak, but he had not stopped. The escapes had continued. Not often. Not enough to expose the pattern. Enough. A child moved from one plantation to another and disappeared before the next census. A man marked as drowned was seen years later in Ohio under a different name. A woman believed captured sent word north through a church network. A family vanished after a storm when the creek flooded and the patrol maps suddenly became useless. At Whitlock, people blamed chance, weather, incompetence, and sometimes Isaiah. They never had the whole picture. That was the design. When freedom finally reached the plantation, it came as an announcement in the yard. Men in blue uniforms stood near the road. Whitlock stood on the porch with his face set hard, pretending the moment was temporary. The overseer kept one hand near his pistol until a soldier told him to move it. No one cheered at first. The people listened. Words were read. Legal words, military words, words that had crossed battlefields to reach people who had paid for them before they ever heard them. Free. The word did not behave like people imagined. It did not make everyone shout. Some fell to their knees, some stared at the ground, some looked toward the cabins as if waiting for the dead to step out and hear it too. Some looked at the master, measuring whether the old danger had truly lost its teeth. Isaiah stood near the stables, alone. Freedom reached him too, but it did not clear his name. No order from Washington could erase what the quarters believed they had seen. To them, Isaiah had not simply survived slavery. He had cooperated with it. He had ridden with patrols. He had informed on Jonah. He had frightened children. He had whipped Samuel. He had tied Ruth and watched her carried away. Freedom did not answer those charges. It made them available. For years, rage had been contained by the plantation's discipline. People had swallowed accusations because speaking them might bring punishment. Now the lid came off, and the first target was not the white master, protected by soldiers and distance and the law's familiar hesitation. It was the man they believed had stood beside him, Isaiah. The crowd formed near the old tack shed before dusk. Not all came to kill him. That is important. Some came to watch. Some came to accuse. Some came because anger gathers witnesses before it becomes action. Some came because the plantation had trained them to assemble when a body was about to be judged. Jonah Turner came with the certainty of a man who had carried one story too long to surrender it easily. His son Eli had disappeared years earlier during an escape attempt. The common account said Eli had been caught on the road and sold west. Jonah believed Isaiah had given the patrol his path. He had never seen Eli again. Loss had hardened into verdict. Samuel's mother came but stayed at the back. Caleb's wife came and would not meet Isaiah's eyes. Others stood close enough to hear. Isaiah was found in the tack shed, sorting rope from harness leather. That detail survived because it felt like proof to those who already hated him. Rope in his hands again, someone dragged him into the yard. The first accusation came from Jonah. "You remember my boy?" Isaiah looked at him. "Yes." "Did you tell them where he went?" "No." The answer was too small for the wound. Jonah stepped forward. "You expect us to take your word?" Isaiah said nothing. Another man shouted, "You tied Ruth yourself." Isaiah's face changed. Only then, not at his own danger, at her name. "She lived?" he asked. The crowd stirred. No one knew. Ruth had become a story with no confirmed ending. Some said she died in the swamp. Some said she was taken again. Some said she reached the north. In the absence of evidence, pain had chosen the worst version. Jonah grabbed Isaiah by the shirt. "You sold your own blood." Isaiah did not resist. That non-resistance condemned him further. People often expect innocence to defend itself loudly. But Isaiah had spent half his life learning that defense could endanger the living. Silence had become reflex. Silence had saved roots, names, helpers, stations, children. Silence was the one weapon he had never put down. Now it turned against him. A woman said, "Say you did it." Isaiah answered, "I did what I had to." The crowd heard confession. It was not. It was the only sentence broad enough to hold the truth and still protect it. Jonah struck him first. Others followed. The violence did not need description in detail to be understood. It was not a battle. It was a release of years of manufactured suspicion. Slavery had built the courtroom, selected the evidence, trained the witnesses, and left the sentence to the wounded. Isaiah fell near the shed door. Someone shouted, "Tell us where Ruth went." Isaiah looked up, blood at his mouth, breath uneven. "Is she alive?" No one answered. The final blows came after that. By nightfall, Isaiah Bell was dead, in the place where he had hidden tools of escape inside tools of bondage. There was no formal burial. Two older women covered him with a feed sack before dawn. One of them had known Mara, She stood over him longer than the other. "He was her boy," she said. "That don't make him clean," the other answered. No one argued. Freedom had come, and Isaiah's name remained chained. Months later, far to the north, Ruth learned of his death from a man passing through Philadelphia with news from Georgia. She was working in the back room of a boarding house, folding clean linen into stacks. Her daughter Anna played under the table with wooden spools. Daniel Freeman was repairing a chair by the stove. The man had come looking for someone else. He carried names the way travelers did after the war, as fragments from broken places. Whitlock Plantation, Georgia. Freed people scattered. Some stayed, some left, some died. Ruth asked almost unwillingly, "Isaiah Bell." The man looked at her carefully. "You kin?" She did not answer. He said, "Dead." The room became still. "How?" The man hesitated. His own people turned on him, said he was a slave catcher's man, said he'd helped sell folks, said he tied his sister for the traders. Daniel looked at Ruth. Ruth continued folding linen, one cloth, then another. Her hands stayed steady. Finally she said, "Some graves are earned." The man did not know what to do with that. He nodded once and left before dark. Daniel waited until the child was asleep. "You never told me his name," he said. Ruth sat at the table. "I told you enough. You told me he died before his body." She looked at him then. Now the body caught up. That was the end of the conversation. For a while, but death has a way of disturbing old evidence. The living can be hated at a distance. The dead become fixed, and the fixed thing invites examination. Ruth began waking before dawn. She would sit beside the trunk where the rope was hidden and not open it. She would go to church and hear words about judgment, mercy, forgiveness, and feel none of them land cleanly. She would see Anna's hands playing with thread and remember Isaiah's fingers around the knot, not shaking because he had practiced. That thought came one morning and would not leave. Why had he practiced? Why had the knot opened? Why had the harness failed at the third bend? Why had the dogs lost her? Ruth had asked herself those questions before, but always as accusations against her own weakness. Now, after hearing of Isaiah's death, they returned as evidence. Evidence does not care whether the heart is ready. Ruth decided to go back. Daniel opposed it at first, not because he wanted to stop her from knowing, because the South after the war was not safe simply because the law had changed. Old masters remained. Patrols changed names. Black freedom was already being negotiated by men who had never paid for black suffering. Ruth knew. She went anyway. Anna stayed with Daniel's sister. Daniel traveled with Ruth as far as he could, then remained in a nearby town where work and caution required him to wait. Ruth continued to the old plantation with a wagon driver who knew when not to ask questions. The Whitlock place looked smaller than memory, and more dangerous for that reason. The big house still stood, though the paint had peeled and one shutter hung loose. The fields were partly abandoned. Some cabins were empty. Some had been repaired by freed families who now worked land they did not own under contracts designed to resemble freedom while preserving hunger. Whitlock was gone from the porch when Ruth arrived, dead, fled, or diminished. No one gave the same answer twice. Ruth did not ask long. She went to the cabin where Mara had lived. The door hung crooked, the floorboards had warped. The hearth was cold. Someone had slept there recently, but not permanently. Ruth stood inside and waited for memory to organize itself. There, near the back wall. A board darker than the rest. Mara had once kept a small wooden box beneath it. Ruth remembered because as a child she had tried to open it, and Mara had struck her hand away, not hard, but sharply enough to teach secrecy. Ruth knelt. The board resisted. She used a knife. The wood came loose with a dry groan. Underneath was dirt, cloth, and a box wrapped in oilskin. Ruth pulled it out and sat back on her heels. Her hands were no longer steady. The box was not locked. Inside lay a coil of rope. The mercy knot was tied at one end. Beside it were folded papers, scraps of cloth, a small charcoal pencil, and a map worn thin along the creases. Ruth unfolded the first paper. Names, not plantation names only, old names beside new ones. Caleb, Josiah Reed, Ohio, Lydia and Thomas, taken north through Mill Creek, child born free. Peter, crossed near Sand Road, Pennsylvania. Samuel, staged punishment, not safe to move until winter. Eli Turner, false capture reported, sent through Cypress route. Ruth stopped. The room seemed to close around her. She read the names again. Caleb lived, Lydia lived, Peter lived, Samuel had been protected. Eli Turner had not been sold west. He had escaped. And beside many entries in Isaiah's hand were notes that changed every memory, moved shirtcloth downstream, marked east crossing unsafe. Cut rear trace for delay, used pepper ash near pine ditch, Jonah suspects. Must turn him away, too dangerous. Little Ike not involved, had to make it look real. Ruth's rope treated with bitter root, third bend if she remembers. Ruth put the paper down. Her body understood before her mind allowed it. The rope had not been guilt. The strap had not been luck. The dogs had not simply failed. Her brother had built her escape while standing under the master's eye. She reached for the last folded sheet. It was addressed to her, not mailed, never sent. Ruth, if you are alive and you hate me, then I did what I had to do. I needed them to believe I belonged to the master. I needed our people to believe it too. A secret carried by too many grieving mouths becomes a noose. I did not sell you. I sold the only thing I owned. My name. Ruth stopped reading there. For years, she had repeated the wrong sentence. My brother sold me. The truth sat in her hands, quiet and merciless. Isaiah had not asked to be remembered kindly. He had not even written like a man expecting forgiveness. The letter continued with instructions, not excuses. Do not clear me if clearing me puts others at risk. Do not speak every name unless you know who is listening. If they ever kill me for what they think I am, do not spend your life defending the dead. Spend it remembering who got out. That was the sentence that broke her, not because it was tender, because it was disciplined. Even from the edge of death, Isaiah was still protecting the living. Ruth remained on the cabin floor until the light changed. Outside, someone called her name, but she did not answer. She held the rope in one hand and the list in the other. Every hated image rearranged itself. Isaiah beside the patrol, Isaiah stepping on tracks, Isaiah insulting Jonah, Isaiah holding the whip, Isaiah tying her wrists. Not innocence, something harder, a life lived inside false evidence. A man turned into a weapon against his own reputation. Ruth had survived because of him. And he had died asking whether she was alive. That was the final cruelty. He never knew the answer. Ruth read the list 3 times before she understood the worst part, not the number of names. Not the years Isaiah had spent under suspicion, not even the fact that she had hated the man who saved her. The worst part was one entry near the middle of the second page. Eli Turner, Jonah's son. Beside the name, Isaiah had written in a smaller hand, as if trying to fit the truth into the margin. False capture reported. Dogs turned at Mill Creek. Rope left loose, sent north through Cypress route. Jonah cannot know. Too dangerous. Ruth stared at the line until the words stopped looking like words. Eli Turner had not been sold west. He had not died on the road. He had escaped, and Isaiah had helped him. The son of the man who would later strike him first. That was the final structure of the crime. Slavery had not only hidden Isaiah's mercy. It had turned the father of a rescued boy into the executioner of the rescuer. No court could correct that. No apology could make it clean. Ruth folded the page carefully and placed it back inside the box. Then she took it out again. She could not leave it there. The paper had become evidence, and evidence left under a floorboard was only silence with better handwriting. She wrapped the list, the map, the letter, and the rope in her shawl. Outside, the old plantation moved under the strange half-light of freedom. A few freed families remained in the cabins. A white agent had posted notices about labor contracts near the storehouse. The words promised wages. The terms kept hunger close. Freedom had arrived, but men were already building new cages out of debt, law, and fear. Ruth walked past the stables. The tack shed still stood. That was where they had dragged Isaiah. No blood remained. Weather had erased the visible evidence. Weather often does that. It cleans the ground and leaves the story contested. She stopped at the doorway. Inside hung old straps, rusted bits, broken harness rings, and coils of rope. The room looked ordinary. That was what disturbed her most. A place could hold the end of a life and still appear useful. Jonah Turner lived less than a mile from the plantation, in a cabin he had repaired with salvaged wood. Ruth found him splitting kindling behind it. He was older than she remembered. His shoulders had narrowed. His beard had gone gray in uneven patches, but his hands were still strong, and the set of his jaw was the same as it had been in the yard years earlier. He saw Ruth and did not recognize her at first. Then his eyes changed. "Ruth Bell," he said. She did not answer immediately. The name sounded different from his mouth. It belonged to a girl tied to a wagon. The woman standing before him had crossed swamps, cities, years, marriage, motherhood, and the false grave she had dug for her brother inside herself. Jonah set the axe down. "I heard you lived." "You heard late." He looked away. A lot of truth came late. That was almost an admission. Almost. Ruth stepped closer. "Did it?" Jonah studied her face. "If you came about Isaiah, I got nothing to hide." Ruth took the folded rope from her shawl. Jonah's expression hardened. "I know what he was," he said. "No," Ruth said. "You know what they made you see." He looked at the rope but did not touch it. "I saw him ride with patrols." "Yes." "I saw him speak against us." "Yes." "I saw him hold a whip." "Yes." "I saw him tie you." Ruth's voice stayed level. "So did I." That answer stopped him. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ruth placed the rope on the chopping block between them. The mercy knot was tied at one end, tight and clean. Jonah stared at it. His face did not collapse all at once. It changed in stages. Suspicion first, then confusion. Then recognition he tried to reject before it reached his mouth. "Where did you get that?" "From my mother's box." He looked up sharply. Ruth unfolded the paper with Eli's name and held it out. Jonah did not take it. "Read," she said. "I don't read." Ruth had forgotten, or maybe she had wanted the cruelty of the written evidence to strike him directly. It could not. The world that stole his son had also stolen the tools to read the record of his survival. So Ruth read it aloud. "Eli Turner, false capture reported. Dogs turned at Mill Creek. Rope left loose, sent north through Cypress Route. Jonah cannot know. Too dangerous." Jonah's face tightened. "That's a lie. It is Isaiah's hand. A dead man can write lies too." Ruth picked up the rope. "Your son ever tell you how he got loose?" Jonah went still. The question had found a buried room. Ruth saw it. She pressed once. "Did he?" Jonah sat down slowly on the cut stump behind him. For a long moment he said nothing. The air between them held the sound of the axe handle rolling slightly in the dirt. Then Jonah spoke. "Years after," he said, "a man came through from Tennessee. Said he had seen Eli near Cincinnati. I thought he was trying to sell comfort. Ruth waited. He carried a message. Jonah swallowed. Said Eli got away when a rope opened. Said it opened like it knew his hand. Ruth held up the knot. Jonah stared at it. Now there was no argument left that did not require him to kill the truth a second time. He reached for the rope but stopped before touching it. His hand shook. I hit him first, Jonah said. Ruth did not soften. Yes. Jonah looked at the ground. I thought, I know what you thought. He told on me. No. He turned you away because you were too close to knowing. If you had thanked him, if anyone had seen it, your boy would have been next. Jonah's breathing changed. He said, I was running my mouth. He saved you from your own gratitude. That sentence landed with more force than accusation. Jonah bent forward, elbows on knees, both hands over his mouth. No sound came out at first. Ruth did not comfort him. There are forms of grief that deserve witnesses but not rescue. Finally, Jonah said, What did I do? Ruth looked toward the old plantation road. The answer was not simple, but it was not obscure. You did what they trained you to do, she said. You killed the man they taught you to hate. Jonah shut his eyes. The system had ended on paper, but here was its residue. A father alive under a lie, a brother dead beneath false charges, a sister holding proof too late to save either one. Ruth left him with the rope for a moment, not as forgiveness, as evidence. Jonah touched the knot with 2 fingers. He pressed the inner loop by instinct, perhaps from Eli's description, perhaps from some buried understanding of rope and fear. The knot loosened. He made a sound then. Small, broken, not enough to repay anything. Ruth took the rope back. I will tell Eli, Jonah said. If you find him, I'll tell him. Ruth folded the list. Tell him he lived because of Isaiah Bell. Jonah nodded. And tell him his father knows. That was all she gave him. The question after that was what to do with Isaiah's name. Some urged Ruth to speak it publicly, to gather the freed families and read every note, to force the plantation to face what it had done, to put Isaiah back among the living with the dignity he had been denied. Others warned her. The names in the box were not only memories. They were routes, helpers, stations, new identities, children born under new names. Men and women who had built lives in places where discovery could still bring danger, kidnapping, retaliation, or legal traps dressed as procedure. Isaiah had understood that. His letter had not asked for vindication. It had asked for discipline. Do not speak every name unless you know who is listening. That line governed Ruth more than grief did. She did not stand in the yard and read the full list. She did not expose the stations. She did not turn every survivor into a target so the dead could be praised. But she did speak enough. At a gathering near the old church with freed families sitting on benches and standing by the walls, Ruth placed the rope on a table. Jonah was there. Samuel's mother was there. Caleb's wife was there. Some of the people who had hated Isaiah were dead. Some had left. Some were alive and unwilling to meet Ruth's eyes. Ruth did not give them a sermon. She gave them facts. Caleb lived, she said. Caleb's wife covered her mouth. Lydia and Thomas lived. Their child was born free. A murmur passed through the room. Peter lived. A woman began to cry quietly. Samuel was not the informer. Samuel, grown now, stared at the table. Ruth Bell lived, she said, because Isaiah tied a knot meant to open. No one moved. Ruth lifted the rope. This is the knot. Jonah stood. That mattered more than anything Ruth could have demanded. He faced the room. I struck him first, he said. Silence. I believed I was punishing a traitor. His voice failed once. He forced it back. I was wrong. The words did not cleanse the room. They did not raise Isaiah. They did not undo years of contempt. But they changed the official memory of those who heard them. In communities denied written power, spoken correction can be a form of record. Samuel's mother stood next. She did not apologize at first. She looked at the rope, then at Ruth. "He brought herbs," she said. Ruth nodded. "I threw them back." No one judged her aloud. They had all lived under the same machinery. They had all been made to interpret survival through smoke. Caleb's wife asked, "Why didn't he tell us?" Ruth answered with Isaiah's own words. "A secret carried by too many grieving mouths becomes a noose." That ended the question. Not because it satisfied everyone, because everyone knew it was true. Years later, Ruth's daughter Anna would remember the rope more clearly than the meeting. She would remember her mother sitting at the table in Philadelphia, oil lamp low, teaching her how to tie the knot. "Wrap once," Ruth said. "Then again, hide the slack here." Anna's fingers were small and impatient. "It looks tight," the child said. "It is meant to." "Then how does it open?" Ruth pressed the inner loop. The rope loosened. Anna stared. "Who taught you?" Ruth looked at the knot. "Your grandmother taught your uncle. Your uncle saved me with it." Anna knew the name by then, Isaiah Bell. Not the man from the first version, not the brother who had died before his body. A different man, harder to understand, harder to praise without lying. "Was he good?" Anna asked. Ruth did not answer quickly. That was the right choice. Simple answers had already done enough damage. At last, she said, "He was a good man who let the world call him evil." Anna considered that. "Why?" Ruth pulled the rope closed again. "Because some people had to survive." The camera, if there had been one, would not need to move far. A table, a mother, a child. A rope. No statue, no grave marker, no courthouse record correcting the charge. Only a knot passed from hand to hand, carrying what paper had failed to protect. Isaiah Bell did not die clean in public memory. He did not receive the reward stories give to hidden heroes. He died accused. He died unanswered. He died asking whether Ruth was alive. And the answer, found too late, was yes. She lived. Caleb lived. Lydia lived. Peter lived. Eli Turner lived. Others lived under names the box did not fully reveal. That is the part the old system could not own, though it owned nearly everything else. It could force a brother to appear monstrous. It could teach a community to mistrust its own defender. It could bury truth under fear so deeply that even freedom did not immediately uncover it, but it could not make the knot stay closed, and that is what remains. Not redemption in the easy sense, not forgiveness arranged for comfort. Evidence. A rope that looked like captivity and functioned as escape. A man remembered first as a traitor, then as a warning, and finally as something more difficult. Proof that under slavery, even goodness sometimes had to move disguised as guilt. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more dark historical stories about the names that were buried so others could live. And comment where you're listening from, your city, state, or country. I want to hear your theory. Should Ruth have exposed the whole truth about Isaiah, even if it endangered the people he saved? Or was his final wish right? Should some sacrifices stay hidden to protect the living?